Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and the past 2 weeks have been the most painful 2 weeks of my life. More painful than when I had a testicle the size of a grapefruit when I was 13 and I was taken from my bar mitzvah rehearsal in an ambulance to the hospital until the day before my big day when I turned to be a man at 13. More painful than my infected knee that fundamentally changed me as an athlete. More painful than losing my grandfather. Yes, the past 2 weeks I've watched my partner, my person in life, in severe pain in the hospital. There's nothing I can do but watch and hope the treatments she is getting all work and get her back home sooner than later. Ange is the strongest person I know, and I would share more with you, but this is her story, and maybe I'll get to tell you her full story one of these days, or at least that's my goal, but it's not to happen here and now right now. We're going to keep some things close to the vest, and Ange doesn't want to be content, and I don't blame her for it. But it's my life too, and it has been absolutely miserable. I am so sad most of the time. I've never been more busy in my entire life. And really, don't feel bad for me because my life is great. I'm healthy. I feel bad for my wife, Ange, who is going through some absolute shit. I can't even imagine what goes through her head. I feel so bad. I don't want to say anything more about it. So my personal life has been a wreck, but I'm lucky that I had 2 podcasts recorded beforehand because there was no way I'd be able to record one this week. So while I will need to play catch up soon, I have another interview with a Jackson Hole legend. A guide this time, Doug Workman. And I recorded with Doug about a month ago. But so much has been going on that I don't even remember enough to give you a good preview of what's going to be in the podcast. What I do remember is that this interview had to be different than the other Jackson interviews that I did. So when I built this thing out, I remembered to steer it into a direction that was totally different than the other Jackson Hole interviews that I did. And I know it turned out to be a great interview and different than the other Jackson Hole ones. Can I repeat myself again and again? I'm sure I could. But I'm not going to edit that out because I don't even care. Before we get into it, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for all of the kind messages. And for all of you that have reached out asking how you can help, well, hold tight. There's a chance that we may do a GoFundMe, and I'll keep you posted about that. For now, I just want you to tell a friend about the show, and please support my incredible sponsors who have stood by me for so long. They are Elan Skis, Outdoor Research, Stanley, Best Day Brewing, and Ski Idaho. Now, it's time to chat with Doug Workman. You're a ski industry legend, you're an AMGA certified guide, an avalanche forecaster, and expert, and you have your eye and your finger on the pulse of the industry when it comes to gear and how it's used in the mountains. So when Nick McNutt almost dies because of a faulty piece of equipment years back, what were people like yourself saying behind the scenes?
Well, for clarification, I'm not an AMGA certified guide, but I assume you're talking about when Nick had the kerfuffle with the beacon.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know how careful I need to be about language, but I guess to be perfectly honest, my feeling was shit happens. Gear breaks. It was obviously terribly unfortunate that happened with the beacon. But, whether you're talking about a beacon that is a piece of electronics housed in plastic, or you're talking about going all the way back to the 90s when Black Diamond had hairline fractures in their carabiners, none of those issues were evil people working at big corporations or incompetent people. It was just that it is a challenge, as you know, from working at K2 to, talking about my boot that broke yesterday. It's not that they're terrible boots. It's a challenge to make equipment that doesn't ever have a failure. And obviously there's a lot more drama around a piece of equipment that is specifically intended for safety. But these are devices that are mass produced by humans, and it happens. It also, just points to how important it is to check your gear as often as is reasonable and as thoroughly as is possible. But yeah, that's my take on it.
And being that you're an expert on this topic, and I would say you're an expert just because of your history, and we're going to talk about Mammut and what you've done with them over the past decade, but how should a situation like that be handled? I mean, it seemed like it was right before the pandemic, and it was kind of swept under the rug and kind of made quiet, and then the athletes tried to make a lot of noise to bring it to everyone's attention, and I don't know how it eventually was rectified, but it was. I have it on a podcast somewhere, but my brain is so scrambled from all the different things going on. But at the end of the day, how do you handle that from a brand side, speculative, if you were ever in that situation?
Well, Mammut had a recall this year when after an enormous amount of R&D. I mean, I, among many, many other people, have been using that new Barryvox S2 for a year or more, and no one identified a simple switch issue that was happening in assembly. And luckily for Mammut and for the people that bought the product, we were able to deal with that really quickly. Possibly, and partly because of the drama we saw from Peeps. But again, do I think Peeps was intentionally being negligent? No. And recalls are always weird things, right? Because there are problems that happen more than once with everybody's equipment.
Yep.
And I'm not a numbers guy, but I know that there's a certain number or percentage in the product line that you need to hit before you're required to recall, both ethically and whatever the industry standard is. And obviously, if it's a safety product, again, people expect the highest level of attention to that matter. But I can't really speak to what was happening with Peeps. I don't know if they thought that that was, a minor issue that could be addressed in a minor way, but clearly the optics of it were not good. But with any product, like, when I think of the brands that I was most loyal to over the years, it was usually the brands that you either had a connection with because you were in the industry, or you were a dirtbag and the shop was nearby and you had a relationship with somebody at the shop. But clearly, when people can replace or repair things and address issues really quickly, you feel taken care of. But I'm sure when that's on a mass scale in a way that could really hit your bottom line, that gets more complicated.
Yeah, there's something to be said for good customer service like that and having things rectified immediately. It does shut people up pretty quickly when you get response and everything happens. But whatever, I was asking you that because I know that you're heavily involved in the development of Mammut's products, and you've been with them for over a decade. And I usually don't do a blatant product plug in the intro, so I figure I'd throw you up against the wall and ask you about the whole Nick McNutt situation. And now we can talk about all that you do for Mammut. And you're no like electro scientist or whatever is needed to build a transceiver. How do they involve you in their development process?
It's pretty simple. It's mostly providing them with suggestions about what I would like to see. And a lot of that feedback comes from the trainings that I do with professional groups. And the biggest reason I like doing those trainings is because no matter how much you never know everything. And when you do those trainings, you get put on the spot regularly, and you always get asked questions you don't know the answer to. I love starting out those trainings by just handing out a notepad and telling people, you're here to write down all the times I say I don't know, and then it's my job to go get the answers to those questions. And if the list is blank at the end of the session, I'm full of shit. And by working with those groups, I also hear a lot of feedback about what other people would like. And some of that feedback I got from search and rescue last year made it into the development of the beacon. It doesn't always. As you can imagine, there's a lot of very experienced people on the development teams who have strong opinions. So sometimes you got to fight and push, and sometimes you win and sometimes you don't. And luckily with that specific product, with the Barryvox, a lot of the functionality of that beacon has not changed tremendously over time. And I give props to the Mammut development team, which was heavily influenced by Manuel Genswein at the time, who developed a platform that we've really been able to build on for 3 generations of beacons now, going back since the original Pulse in 2006. So it's a lot of good people pushing and pulling to get that product where it's been.
Okay. And then the product is designed to save people's lives. And when you think about that, what's the best letter that you've received from someone who lived because of the product you were involved in designing?
Can I count myself?
You can count yourself.
The truth of the matter is there are not a tremendously large number of people who are completely buried in avalanches. So I don't know that I've ever received a dramatic letter about somebody being recovered in an avalanche, but I have had my life saved because of the Mammut airbag. And I have also been dug out when completely buried, while using the beacon. So I'm definitely keenly aware of the fact that it's not hype, that those are life-saving products.
Well, with the airbag, it was like 2009. You had a couple clients chip in. They bought you an airbag pack before anybody had them. They were probably like $1,500 at that point. No dirtbag could buy one. So it was like really cool that they gave it to you, because that one, we can tell that story as well. There was an incident there, but then you also had the Mammut one save your life as well. Like you've had to rip the cord more than once.
Yeah, those two primary incidents are in '09. Maybe better than I do. I think it was '09. It was the same year Big Wally died. And yes, the clients gave me an airbag and I triggered an avalanche. And I do think there's no way to know this for certain, but I do think it's very likely that that airbag saved my life. And then a few years later in 2015, I triggered an avalanche and was unable to get to the trigger of the airbag until very late in kind of the cycle of the flow of the avalanche. So I did successfully deploy the airbag, but I was in a terrain trap. And I do think I would have been buried much deeper if it hadn't been for the airbag, but I was still completely buried. And a friend, another guide, was able to get to me very quickly because of his location and because of the beacon, and then was able to identify a small swatch of the airbag that was not buried. But when I was recovered that time, I wasn't breathing.
Oh, no shit. That's scary.
Yeah, I was blue and not breathing.
For how long were you under?
I don't know. I'm sure we could go back to radio records and try to figure it out. But, I think it was a matter of minutes, but long enough that I lost consciousness.
And you're out there with like the best people in the world with the most experience, I would think. But like, if that was somebody else, that could have been something much more scary. I mean, that's crazy to me. But either way, we're going to stop right here and get into your life and times. You grow up in Connecticut. It's your brother, Jed. Do you have any other siblings? And what's the age difference between you all?
Jed's a year and a half older, and I have a younger sister, Meredith, who's a year and a half younger, and she's in North Carolina.
And was it a ski family? Did you guys like spend nights and weekends at Mount Southington growing up and shit like that?
We learned to ski at Powder Ridge and Mount Southington in Connecticut. And then as we got a little older, a little more capable, we spent most of our weekends skiing up in Vermont, all over Mount Snow and Killington and all the different places up there.
So you driving like 6 or 12 hours kind of round trip each weekend to go ski, and your dad and mom are hardcore into it too?
I think about it every day. I'm driving 15 minutes.
How painful it was with nothing to do in the station wagon or something?
My kids don't know how lucky they are. Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. And then with you and Jed, was it like one of those things where you guys are best friends? Are you guys rivals? Are you fighting? How did that kind of work out?
Oh, there was plenty of fighting, but we had similar enough interests, and those interests remained similar throughout high school and college. That always kept us very close.
And so were there any team sports or anything growing up, or was it all about adventure?
We went to a high school where team sports were pretty emphasized, and I was fairly involved with those things. I was a wrestler in high school, and my brother was not into the team sports very much. And he had a chemistry teacher who taught him how to rock climb as part of an outing club. And then my brother taught me kind of what he learned doing that, which was, very rudimentary at the time. We were just setting up top ropes at Ragged Mountain in Connecticut and climbing around in our Converse All-Stars and sometimes in our wrestling shoes. And yeah, the combination of that and skiing made going out west really attractive. And my brother being older, he made the launch first and went out to Utah. And, as soon as he had managed to, crack that open, because nobody where we lived went west of the Mississippi.
Was it tough when your brother moves out and he's like your adventure partner in crime and he leaves a year before you and you're just like stuck home that senior year? That's where you figure out like, I'm going to do Colorado because he's doing Utah and I'm going to figure out something different?
Well, I mean, I still wouldn't say we were like super hardcore adventurers at the time in that our skiing was ski area skiing and our climbing was top roping. I mean, I remember seeing people lead climb at Ragged Mountain, and it was just more than anything, it was certainly inspirational, but it was also just really confusing because that hadn't been part of what we'd really been formally introduced to. So, it was aside from like reading climbing magazines and seeing that stuff and seeing all the dramatic pictures of the landscape and the scenery out west, I would say that the adventure was just beginning. So when I got to college, while I thought I knew some things, I was still very, very, very green.
Before you even get to college, given that you and your brother are both badass mountain guides, do you do like the whole Boy Scouts thing and Eagle Scout stuff and learn all that stuff as a kid, or does that stuff happen later?
Never did any of that stuff as a kid. No, it was just kind of adventuring with the family. And I would say my family in general was pretty adventurous. I don't know if I can attribute it to one parent or the other, but there was definitely a willingness to take some risk and think outside of the box throughout the family.
And so when you pick Colorado and you head out that way, are you that crusty climber guy in Tevas back in 1991, like listening to the Dead and climbing all summer and skiing in the winter? Is that life for you, or does that evolve into that? Or am I just making up bullshit?
No, that's pretty much spot on.
Okay.
The Tevas and the long hair and the Grateful Dead and all of that was definitely spot on.
So you're going to shows and stuff in the summer and kind of road tripping, living that life, like definitely having like a good mix of balance of party, school, and going out and climbing and skiing?
Yes, all of that. Yeah. I don't really want to talk about the Grateful Dead, but yes, my first rock concert ever was the Grateful Dead. My father brought home tickets for my brother and I when I was in 8th grade, and my brother had his driver's license. So we went and saw them in the mid 80s, late 80s in Hartford, and somehow that got all wrapped into it. And obviously there was plenty of adventure back then in following the Grateful Dead.
Yeah, did you go on like tour and go see like 20 shows in a summer type deal?
Not that many. I think I saw like 35 in my lifetime, but we definitely went and saw lots of shows.
Okay. And was your brother in on that too?
He was.
Okay. And so your lives have been intertwined forever. We're not really going to talk about your brother that much, but can you just summarize his legendary career really quickly?
Well, we both, out of college, ended up working at Knowles, and that kind of helped us formalize some of those skills. And he quickly relocated to Alaska, either in the late 90s or early 2000s, similar timing to when I was kind of landing in Jackson. And obviously, the number of adventures that are available to you in Alaska are endless. And he has since been working at Valdez Heli Ski Guides since the early 2000s and now helps run the place.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start things out with Elan Skis. And while I could tell you all about the new award-winning Ripstick ski models or the award-winning Playmaker Twin Tip line, and then push you to demo them at your local shop because they're going to make you have more fun on the mountain, I'm just going to talk about your local shop. There's something special about stepping into your local ski shop. The smell of the freshly waxed skis, discussions about where to find the best skiing, what the shop kids like skiing on best, what they think the best products are, and that expert advice makes these shops more than just a great place to buy gear. Elan believes that ski shops are the soul of skiing, a place where skiers come together for genuine human connection, and that can't be replaced online. And I agree with them. I mean, going to a ski shop is an experience where you connect with a like-minded person who, in a short conversation, understands what you want to do and sets you up with the right gear so you can have as much fun as possible. Shops are among the last authentic pieces of ski community that we have left. So please buy your ski gear from your local ski shop. You can find a list of Elan dealers nationwide over at elanskis.com. Next up, it's Ski Idaho. People have been shredding Idaho ski resorts for over 100 years. It's the home of some of the best skiing and resorts in the lower 48. Think 19 ski areas with epic terrain and shorter lift lines. That's right. Unlike a lot of places, when you ski in Idaho, that means you aren't going to spend half of your day waiting in lift lines. And Idaho skiing is affordable, with over half the ski areas offering day tickets for under $60. That's hard to beat. And between the terrain you're going to find at destination resorts like Sun Valley, Grand Targhee, Tamarack, Schweitzer, and Silver, or day areas like Lookout, Brundage, Bogus, Soldier, Kelly, Canyon, and Pebble Creek, from groomers and bumps and terrain parks to Powell and glades to backcountry, Idaho has it all. And it's the best kept secret in North American skiing. It's skiing like it used to be, with lots of independents, including mom and pops and nonprofits. To find out more, head on over to skiidaho.us. My final sponsor this round is Stanley. It's hard to be known for both being that green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot and being the most popular product in pop culture. But that's what Stanley is these days, and that's what you get when you mix in the quality that Stanley has been known for since they pretty much created the category of keeping drinks piping hot and ice cold in 1913. And lately, over 100 years later, that quality, combined with some incredible colorways, partnerships, collaboration, and events, has made Stanley bigger than ever before. And while they're creating some game-changing marketing, working with people like Olivia Rodrigo and Messi, are you kidding me? That's so cool. But what I love is how functional Stanley's products are. I personally use a Stanley pint glass every single day, and I swear by them. And my wife and so many others out there can't live without their Stanley quenchers. I mean, Stanley makes a product for everyone, and now everyone can get Stanley's incredible products in a colorway that totally suits their style, like my new Miami Vice colored pint glasses. I love my Stanley stuff, and I want you to love Stanley too. And I bet you didn't know that Stanley offers Powell Movement listeners their biggest discount that they make available to the public. That's right. I'm going to save you 30% on all of your Stanley products. Here's what you need to do. Go to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and at checkout, enter the code POWELL2025. That's a capital P and then the numbers 2025 with no spaces in there, and you're going to save that 30%. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast.
I couldn't figure out what you did between the years after college and then the years before you started at the Utah Avalanche Center. And I did find that there were like trips with Jimmy Chin to Pakistan. And is that kind of that period in between college and Utah?
Yeah, that was when I was working at Knowles, living in a van, trying to figure out where to go. Even back then, I had some friends living in Jackson, but even back then, it seemed like prohibitively expensive place to try to live. So I kept going back to Salt Lake. I was making snow at Alta when I wasn't on Knowles trips, and then just climbing and skiing as much as I could.
And so how do you get on a trip to Pakistan like that? And tell that story, because it sounded like a pretty gnarly one.
Well, the year before that, I was just thumbing through the American Alpine Journal and saw pictures of people climbing in the Kachatna Spires in leather boots, in old gear. And I mistakenly thought that since routes in the mountains are typically at lower grades because people are climbing in boots and in, cold weather gear, that the grades didn't seem that intimidating. And I don't even recall how I got the idea to apply for an American Alpine Club grant. And my brother was all in, and we had never climbed in Alaska, but we were always far more attracted to rock climbing in the big mountains than any kind of mountaineering. And so we targeted the Kachatnas, and we enlisted a friend who was quite a bit older than us. He was probably 10 or 15 years older than us, a climber that I had met in Colorado Springs. And he had climbed a bunch of big peaks in Alaska. So we knew he had kind of the glacier experience and the cold weather experience that we didn't really have.
Okay.
And he was just kind of a jack of all trades who could figure anything out. And so we knew that he would take to aid climbing quickly, which we knew was going to be a big part of it, despite the fact that he didn't have a tremendous amount of experience doing that. And he did take to it very quickly. And we, by the standards of the 90s, we did a first ascent, but we failed at getting all the way to the top of Mount Nevermore. We got to the top of the wall and then quite a ways up the ridge before we had to turn back. We were pretty lucky that we didn't get hurt or not make it back. We were on the wall for far longer than we thought we would be.
Just like stuck on the wall?
We had just tremendously bad weather, as the Kachatnas are known for. There was a lot of rain and wet snow, and we wouldn't even take belays. We would just rope solo the pitches because it was just so brutally awful to be out there belaying for many hours while somebody was leading an aid pitch.
Yeah.
So we would do it what they called capsule style in the day. And so you would be jugging up lines into the storm and then just trying to get one pitch done, which would take many hours while everybody else was hunkered down. And then the rain eventually turned into freezing rain and snow, and the wall got encased in ice, and then the sun would come out and these huge sheets of ice would come down onto your portaledge. It was terrible. And when we finally got back to where Paul Roderick from Talkeetna Air Taxi had dropped us off, he had been really concerned about us. I don't think we even had a satellite phone. He was really concerned about us and had done a lot of flyovers, but it had always been so cloudy that I don't think he'd really been able to ever identify where we were. So I think it was definitely going through his head that we were probably gone.
Right.
And then we got back to base camp, which had been pretty devastated by ravens. But we learned that ravens really like beer.
Okay.
They had dug up our cache, which was buried deep in the snow, and every single can of Miller High Life had been devoured.
Oh.
And then we spent another week or so eating the remnants of the food. I had really bad immersion foot, trench foot, because I couldn't afford plastic boots at the time. And those pictures of the older generations in leather boots, I convinced myself, well, it worked for them, it'll work for me. And it's amazing how the mind works. I knew my feet were in a lot of pain, but they were pretty much fine in terms of being operable. But the second I got back to where I knew the plane would hopefully pick us up, my feet swelled up like melons and were no longer just in pain that I couldn't even get my boots back on.
Oh, geez. Is that like the worst suffering that you've had to do on a trip?
That was definitely probably the worst suffering I ever did on a trip.
Okay. And now, we're going to talk about moving to Jackson, because I think it's like late 90s, like 99-ish when you moved to Jackson. And did you spend time at the infamous Simpson House?
I lived there for quite a while, yeah.
Can you describe that place and like the cast of characters that would come in and out?
It was just kind of a classic ski bum house. It was owned by Sam Southwick, who himself was a tremendously cool character. He was a doctor that Paul McAllister, who founded the ski area, had found skiing down at Alta. And back in the 60s, a lot of the good skiers were from Austria, and they were ski racers who were still skiing on really stiff skis. And Sam and a lot of those folks down at Alta had realized that soft skis gave you much better flotation. So Sam, he was very humble. He just passed away a couple years ago. But Sam Southwick ended up getting kind of recruited by the folks founding the Jackson Hole ski area and naming a lot of the runs there, like the Alta Chutes and Bird in the Hand. And he, despite being a fairly successful doctor, still was a ski bum at heart and allowed people to live there and rent there for very, very, very little money. So lots of folks like Greg Von Dorsten and Stephen Koch had lived there. I wouldn't call it like a climber specific house. It was kind of more just a ski bum house. A lot of the folks I lived with, maybe even all of them, are still here. And yeah, I mean, it was just a place that was packed full of ski bums all the time. And there wasn't much going on with those folks other than skiing in the winter and climbing and rapping and doing that kind of stuff in the summer.
Were you living right in town?
Well, Jackson, the town, is not actually terribly close to the resort. And town was always the less expensive place to live. So there were a lot of real dirtbaggy houses back then. The village was, even back then, a little less attainable.
Okay. And I think what's crazy is like, and during my research, it seemed weird that you get there in 99-ish and it's like you're adopted into the hardcore Jackson scene almost like right away. Like, how did you meet the folks that were the Jackson Hole Air Force and how long did it take them to accept you? Because it didn't seem like it was like they were going to look to any stranger and be like, come be part of our crew.
I actually didn't ski that much at the ski area when I first moved here. I was way more interested in skiing in Grand Teton National Park and up on Teton Pass and getting just more confident and capable at backcountry skiing. But just the climber and adventure in me was far more attracted to adventure skiing back then than skiing at the hill.
Okay.
And I didn't actually really start skiing there until 2005 when I got a job on ski patrol.
So yeah, that's
Uh,
crazy that you took a job as ski patrol, but all those dudes in the Jackson Hole Air Force, I mean, are you part of that whole crew?
I mean, I wasn't here when the gates were closed. So I would say that the real heyday of the Jackson Hole Air Force was when those gates were closed, like pre 99.
Okay.
So I became friends with a lot of those people. And sure, I've got a sticker and a pin and a patch. But in all honesty, I would not consider myself, a member of the Jackson Hole Air Force like the original hardcore members.
No, sure. And it's like, you're maybe second wave or 2.5 wave, I guess, if the gates were open, then you probably came in like a year or two after Sick Rick. But when you think about it, you became a patroller in 2005. The Air Force and all those guys had it out for patrollers. Like one of your mentors, Doug Coombs, he was kicked off the mountain by ski patrollers. Did people care that you were a patroller?
No, nobody cared. And they were already by that time pretty hardcore members of the Air Force, like Kevin Brazell, who had become full-time ski patrollers. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody just needs to work in some form or fashion. And it was a great way to gain access to the hill and learn a lot.
And then when you think of the people that you're tight with, I keep bringing up the Air Force, but we talk about mentors. You mentioned a mentor earlier on who was on that trip with you and he was like 20 years older and he kind of taught you some stuff about glaciers and stuff that he knew. But when you think about the first big mentor in your life, I would think that's Doug Coombs. He mentored so many different people. How tight were you with Doug?
I mean, I was friends with Doug, but again, I met him later. I first actually met him, I think, at the Rock Gym, and then he was just around and he was friends with friends. And when I skied the Otter Body with him in whatever year that was, 2005, he had asked me to do that with him because I had skied it kind of serendipitously the year before with Eric Henderson, which at the time we had skied the Grand before. We went back up there to ski it again. And I don't even think I really knew what the Otter Body was at the time. And Eric and I started talking about skiing down there. And just with the kind of climbing adventuring skills, we knew that with ropes, we could, Chenard always joked about with, ski mountaineering is kind of a joke because if you're willing to rappel, you can ski kind of any patch of snow anywhere, which is, there's definitely truth to it. So we just kind of wandered down there and skied it. And Doug got word of that. And he had really wanted to ski that on film ever since he first skied it with Newcomb. And he'd asked Newcomb to do it for a film. And Newcomb had other stuff going on and couldn't do it. So Doug just asked me to do it. So that was a big event for me. And it was just kind of serendipity in that way. And I think I had started working at Valdez Heli Ski Guides the year before, but that was also after Doug and Emily had sold the company in 2002. So I never worked with Doug in Valdez. So there was kind of it was kind of more a lot of parallel stuff going on. And he definitely was a mentor, and mentors are just an amazingly important thing. When I look back at my skiing and climbing, I really wish that I had more mentors. We learned a lot of stuff by trial and error. And while there's a lot of value in that, it's definitely a much slower and less safe way to gather that skill set.
For sure. I mean, would Don Sharif be a mentor to you as well?
Don Sharif was a huge mentor to me, and I had met him through the Knowles community, and he's the one that asked me to come up to Valdez, which utterly shocked me.
So that's how that all works out, is Don is really, because I thought that Doug might have been like the guy that got you to Alaska and got you working at Valdez, but it's actually Don who's the huge mentor, and let's go from here.
Yeah, Don was definitely the one that opened that door for me.
He was in Alaska, and he was like the king of knowledge almost, right?
Yeah, at the time, backcountry in the early 2000s, and whether it's justified or not, I think that there was a feeling among the backcountry skiing community that they weren't really getting the information that they wanted from the avalanche forecast that was generated by the Forest Service. Not that it wasn't adequate for the average Joe, but there were people who felt like it could be much more detailed and there could be more information. And myself and some other friends had started what I guess nowadays you'd probably call like a blog or something like that, which was like a community forum to share observations, to try to give everybody and get access to more information. And Don at the same time was kind of publishing his own version of a forecast that was bringing a lot of those obs together and had a lot more detail in it, both in what was going on in the snow and just in a broader location. The forecast for a long time was very much specific to the southern Tetons and didn't really apply at all to the park. And so Don was generating that. So when Mark was looking to kind of move on from being the lead forecaster in Valdez, he tapped Don. And Don ended up kind of being a one-stop shop for everything up there, from avalanche forecasting to just all general operations. And there was kind of a changing of the guard going on after Doug and Emily sold the company to Scott Rayner. And that's how I got tapped. I was just in Don's world. And again, just like wandering down the east face of the Grand without really having any idea of any of the past history or very much of it or where I was going. I think when I first went up to Valdez, I really had zero idea what I was getting into. I remember a bus driver at the airport, when I told him I was going to Valdez, said, "Are you going extreme skiing?" And I was thinking to myself, I hope not.
You know, when you think about when you went there, Doug sold to Scott Rayner, and this is like the start of the heli wars. Scott doesn't do the correct paperwork, or someone lets paperwork fall by the wayside, kind of like what happened with Park City and Vail, where they lost a parking lot. But this is in Alaska and a tenure, and you lose part of your tenure right there. And I think Dean Cummings was able to swoop that up because he was better at the paperwork. Is that how the whole heli wars started?
I don't know when the heli wars started or finished. I mean, I think at the end of the day, all of those companies were founded by competitors. They were competitive people, and businesses compete. So, I don't know what you've heard or what kind of drama is associated with that, but I guess I look at it as just companies and people competing for business.
I mean, did things ever get ugly in that?
I think it was more drama than ugly, but it was definitely a lot of people that didn't really enjoy being in the same room with each other, which was too bad because they were all passionate, gifted people who probably would have really liked each other in any other setting.
Yeah, but the whole business thing, kind of in the way that they handled their business and did their business, is what rubbed each other the wrong way.
Yeah, the business and the egos. There was always a lot of really big egos in the heli ski industry.
That and big personalities.
Big personalities, big egos, and a small piece of pie that everybody wanted all of.
Yeah.
And everybody working on state and federal land that's not very well regulated. So it's not like Canada where everybody just kind of gets their piece and stays in their piece.
Oh, there's a lot of gray area up there?
Yeah, it's pretty gray. And for years and years and years, despite the fact that Doug first had that Forest Service permit and then Dean, for many years, nobody really acknowledged that and there was no oversight. So there was a lot of semi-illegal stuff going on, or straight illegal.
Yeah. It's time for my second round of sponsors, and this time I'm starting out with Outdoor Research. I've been using OR products since I moved to Seattle almost 25 years ago because they outperform everything on the market. I mean, they build products to perform in the miserable weather that the Pacific Northwest can be known for. And when you live here, you need to have best-in-class gear, and that's what OR has always delivered. From building industry-leading gear for mountaineers, which are still best in class, to the mittens that every snowboarder wore in the 90s, which are making a comeback in a big way, to the new styles, cuts, fits, and kits that they've developed with the help of their incredible athlete roster that includes world champion Troy Podmilsack, freeski legend Mark Abma, and X Games gold medalist Zoe Atkin, just to name a few. While OR has always been building the best products to outperform everything else in brutal wet weather, the recent focus on style is what has not only me, but my kid and his friends all wanting to wear OR gear. Because now, it looks as good as it performs, and that's a bold statement. But don't take it from me. Head on over to outdoorresearch.com, check out the products, buy yourself something, and stay drier and warmer than ever before. My final sponsor is Best Day Brewing. And if you haven't heard of Best Day, they are hands down the best tasting NA beer on the market. I enjoy Best Day for so many reasons. The flavor is the most important. I swear by the hazy IPA, the Kolsch, and the Electro Lime. The beauty of Best Day is that it really tastes as good or better than an alcoholic beer. I mean, in a blind taste test, if I put an Electro Lime against any Mexican beer, 9 out of 10 times, my friends are going to pick the Electro Lime because they like it better, and you can drink a few of them at the bar or in the parking lot after skiing, and you don't have to worry about driving or making bad decisions. Really, I haven't quit drinking. When I go to the bar to have beers, I always mix in a few Best Days with the leaded stuff, so I can be more functional throughout the night, and an added benefit that I didn't expect was it makes me last twice as long. I mean, I can stay till closing time. I don't know what you were thinking, but if you want to have your best day or night ever, or just want to enjoy a few cold ones anywhere, grab a Best Day and you can forget about the calories, forget about the alcohol, and forget about getting in trouble on the way home. To see all the flavors and order some beer, head on over to bestday.com, and if you're flying on Alaska, you can enjoy a Best Day Kolsch at 30,000 feet. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast.
Can you describe what the early Tsaina Lodge days were, like when it was just a dining room and a bar?
A lot of drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole environment, definitely, from the people paying to ski to the people who are getting paid to ski, everybody is definitely in a vacation mentality 24 hours a day. So it was definitely very much a work hard, party hard scene.
So like you're pretty much like leaving the helipad, coming into the bar, taking off your ski boots and sending it at the bar too, because you're making sure the customers are having a great time?
Every day.
And so you're just living a full-on vacation, and you get to powder ski any day that it's clear out?
Any day that it's clear out.
And it's like free for you.
Even better, you're getting paid.
Yeah, that's so incredible. And for you, like when you're skiing like that, you're guiding people, you're keeping people safe. Does skiing change when it's just you out there skiing for yourself compared to when it's you working?
Definitely. I mean, the cynical part of me says the best way to ruin anything you love is to turn it into a job. Yes, skiing for work is definitely very different than skiing for pleasure.
Like if you think about your trips in general, what's the best trip that you've gone on in life where there was no work expected from you? You weren't guiding anyone, you weren't doing anything but going out there for yourself, and a selfish trip with you and your brother or you and whoever it was, but it wasn't for anyone else.
The first thing that comes to mind is last year. I went to Europe just to go ski with friends, and I can't even remember the last time I did a trip like that. And I'm sure everybody handles this differently, but I find that skiing for myself, while you still have the same need to keep your activities as safe as possible, I think for me, not being the one who is responsible for knowing where to go, when to go, how to keep it safe, but not have it be so safe that it's boring, making sure the snow's good. When you take that off your shoulders, it arguably is a far more enjoyable experience.
And so you got to do that last year. And while that's incredible, I mean, that's on your own dime, so it's a totally different experience. But another thing that you do is guide trips.
And thinking of like the private business of being a guide and keeping people safe, is that a lucrative deal? Because like I read some of the places that you go to and like you've been all over the world. And I'm guessing that based on being in Jackson and all your travels, you've probably befriended people that I'm sure you know, people that are dirtbags and people that are billionaires. And that just happens to be the people that you run with in your circles. And do people just say they want to go on a trip and then hire you to make sure they're safe in the mountains? But it's like a lucrative thing where you're getting an all expenses paid trip and then a big check to go travel with friends?
Yeah, it can be lucrative, and it requires you to be pretty much always saying yes and always being gone. And when you're doing that, you obviously give up a lot of things, but you can make good money.
I mean, is it one of those deals where people are paying you for not only just keeping them safe in the mountains, but you're doing all the beta in the beginning, like researching, so you know everything's going to be seamless on the trip? They're pretty much hiring you for 2 weeks to not be a tour guide, but to show them all the shit and get them home safe? Or is it just guiding in the mountains?
No, it's everything. But for a long, long time, I skied with a lot of people, a lot of the same people over and over again that became very close friends, many of whom are still very, very close friends, maybe even still some of my very best friends. So, yeah, I guess the biggest reason it worked for me, I mean, I still say that aside from all the amazing skiing I've gotten to do, that the best thing for me about guiding was being able to meet a lot of tremendously good people who come from worlds that I never would have met otherwise. I mean, ski bumming is great, but you tend to be around people who are also great people, but people who think and live very much like you do.
Just watching the Weather
And
Channel and praying for Powell?
yeah, and so it was life changing for me to meet people from all walks of life where we ended up bonding and becoming very close despite what on paper were big differences. And luckily, we enjoyed being with each other so much, and they trusted me enough that they were, in many cases, many times, willing to go places where I knew nothing about where I was going. And they, because of that, were also able to take part in the sense of adventure of going somewhere where the guide had no idea where we were going to ski the next day or what was around the next corner or what the conditions were going to be like. And so I got really lucky in that way. I wouldn't have gotten to go to all those places all those times if I was always with people who expected everything to be extremely manicured.
No, totally. I mean, it sounds like you run a program like Kim Reichhelm, where it's ski with Doug, not ski with Kim, but like amazing trips with amazing people that have all become her best friends and from all walks of life with the common denominator of loving skiing. And then she shows them an incredible time in the mountains. Because from what I hear, everybody says that, I wouldn't say it's like a McConkey magnetic personality that you have, but everybody says that you listen really, really well and that you're like super focused and you have this like smile that kind of lets everybody know that everything's going to be all right. And people are genuinely attracted to you. And that's why you're able to get these kind of trips, because people just like you. Has it always been that way?
I don't know if it's always been that way, but I definitely, like I said, have got really lucky with who I met along the way.
Do you have any famous
And
clients?
I don't think so. Not in terms of like famous, like, no, I don't have, no, not like celebrity type clients. No.
Just like super wealthy, done really well for themselves clients?
Yeah, Valdez especially was a breeding ground for people who, you don't go to Valdez unless you have a certain risk tolerance and appetite for adventure. And you can't go to Valdez unless you have, the time and the resources to do trips that take a long time and cost some money. So that combination, it's not everywhere in the ski guiding world. If we're just, especially talking about skiing, there's lots of locations where you might be ski guiding where people are hiring a ski guide and it's kind of a one-off, like, oh, I'm going for a week or two to this location and I'm mostly just skiing around, and maybe I'll hire a guide for the day. So
Yep.
there's lots of places where you can be earning your living guiding where you're not necessarily going to meet those people. But when you're working in a location like Valdez or other places where people make a big time commitment and a big financial commitment to be there, and there is a certain inherent level of risk that they are aware of and willing to take because of their passion for skiing, those people are ripe for doing other trips. And it's not hard to meet people in all walks of life that are great people. Most people are great people. So when you find those great people who have similar interests to you, and they're offering you something because they can finance the trip and you truly genuinely like each other, it creates a really good match.
Well, that's awesome, but that's the good of it all when you have the great match. But like, what happens when close calls, or what's the worst thing that's happened with a client in the field?
Well, I've, knock on wood, never had a fatality in the mountains, but the list of near misses is fairly long. Usually they involved me, but one of the worst was a client who turned into one of my very best friends who fell in a very deep crevasse in Antarctica. It was probably 40 feet.
Holy shit.
It was big, and broke his leg on the way down and was buried pretty deep in the snow from the snow bridge that collapsed at the bottom. And I guess that was one of the worst, in that it was maybe one of the closest calls in terms of something that very easily could have been a fatality. But as luck would have it, it was not. And despite the fact that a broken leg sucks and he had to fly on a C-130 home with a broken leg, in the greater scheme of things, it was not terribly consequential. That could have been really bad.
So he's able to make it out. And while it wasn't a fatality, there's been so many fatalities with people that you know over the years. I mean, we don't have to list them, but I would say it's easily over what you can count on your fingers, just from people that have passed in the mountains. And there's decision making, there's statistics, there's all different things that happen, but you keep putting yourself out there, or year after year after year. Do you ever worry about yourself? Like, is it worth going out there again? Given I know you're not a full-time doing exactly what you've always done, but have you reeled it back in almost?
Yes, I've reeled it way back in, and I spend a lot less time doing that than I used to, doing any of that stuff. And I still very much love it. Some of the fun has definitely been taken out of it because of the sheer volume of friends that have been lost.
Yeah.
And how much awareness is now just like constantly present. You know, statistically speaking, you can obviously do that stuff a lot without having accidents. But when you're doing it every day, and when all of your friends are doing it every day, suddenly, despite the fact that statistically you usually get away with that stuff, I mean, suddenly it starts to feel like it's not so statistically insignificant, and it's just more in your face. And I really honestly don't know how good human beings are at changing their behaviors. I know everybody in the avalanche courses and all of that the whole world, people love to believe that you can just study and pay attention and make responsible decisions and stay safe that way. I'm not a person that really believes that.
I mean, so many people have died that knew so much that if it was just about knowledge, they wouldn't be dead.
Yeah, I mean, I got asked to teach an avalanche course to children years and years ago.
Okay.
And I was babbling on about all the stuff and avalanche anatomy that you're supposed to teach people. And at the end of the day, I told the kids, you guys have been in school together for a really long time. And why don't you just line up on the wall? And the people on the right are the people that like taking risk. And I don't care what kind of risk it is. It could be risk on the playground. It could be people who are willing to pass notes in class. people who are just more likely and willing to take risk and get in trouble. And line up and feel free, if you don't agree with where somebody puts themselves, to put them in their place. And they did it in half a second. They all knew themselves. They all knew each other. And I think that hopefully was a lesson for them, but it was also a lesson for me. Like, there's some sort of saying about like the way you do something is the way you do everything. It's like, you've got to know your own history about like, do you get speeding tickets? Do you get in trouble in the bar? Like all these things. Like, what's your desire for risk, your willingness for risk? Like, how much do you like it? And at the end of the day, you can know everything about the snow, everything there is to know. There's obviously a lot that you're not going to know.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you want to do what you want to do. And I've always liked risk. And if I had to take the risk out of skiing and ski like probably the majority of people like to ski at Deer Valley or wherever they go on vacation, it wouldn't really be skiing for me. So I've kind of had to come to the not so great realization that, the best way for me to not die the way that so many friends have died is not to like know more about the shape of a snow crystal. It's about being willing to have less risk on. And if that means that that's less days in the mountains, I'm kind of okay with that. Because the days I do go out and have a big day in the mountains, I still try to be more conservative, but I still like dangerous activities. And I mean, the time that I was completely buried in an avalanche, my wife was pregnant. So I had already started building a family, and even that was not enough to like automatically or, somehow change what I liked to do.
And that's just how you're wired, huh?
Definitely some of that. That's how you're wired. And it's what you like to do. If you take somebody who their primary forms of enjoyment are chess and reading books, they're going to be a safer ski partner, even if they know a lot less about the shape of the snow crystal, because they're just not going to have the same appetite for like, why don't we just do one more? Or let's poke around the corner and go over there where we don't know what's over there.
True.
They're going to be satisfied with a more benign experience.
You say that, but I heard a rumor that Doug was really into chess. Was that true, or is that just something I heard?
I'm not saying if you like chess, you're not going to, you're not a dangerous person. I'm just trying to say that, like, some people are far more drawn to risky activities.
For sure.
And I could be wrong about this, but I don't think, I know Doug got buried in an avalanche in the Snakes. I know, and I'm sure that he had near misses, but I think Doug had a pretty damn good track record.
I'm sure. Well, the last thing I'm going to talk about, because you brought up kids, and then it reminded me that you took a kid out to Otterbody, which is like one of the gnarlier lines that you can do in the Grand Teton. Did you have any reservations taking Kai out there after he had almost a career-ending injury, and this is like him getting back on the horse?
I didn't have any reservations or apprehension really about skiing a consequential line with Kai. Kai is a tremendously capable skier. The thing that I'm most uncomfortable with, that I have a harder time with professional athletes, is kind of the same thing that I think is problematic for guides. When you have to go, because that's your job, whether it's for a camera or for a client, that presents a whole new set of obstacles. If you're a ski bum and it's blue out, but you know that there is something in the snowpack that is less predictable than you would like, you can stay home. When you're a heli ski guide and your clients just sat on the ground for 5 days, but it's been snowing 3 feet on surface hoar and now it's blue, you're going out.
Yeah.
And that obligation to perform is problematic. And the same thing is true with skiing for a film. So the day that we skied the Otterbody, it was slightly unnerving to be skiing really steep, consequential terrain on very firm snow, which we were doing. But I was very confident in Kai and Nick McNutt's ability to do that. Skiing the next day on the Middle Teton, which was lower elevation and warmer and had some wet snow issues, was far more concerning to me because we'd already tagged the big thing we needed to tag, but they wanted to ski all three. And it was a little gray in that there was wet snow, some of it was moving. And I voiced my concerns, and those guys said, we're going to ski it. You're not here to decide for us. And we're aware of the hazards and feel comfortable with it. And they skied it, and they explained what their approach was going to be. And it all worked out fine. But that was an example of where, like, we weren't necessarily skiing that day because the conditions were perfect and they were making as informed a decision as you could. But that to me is the piece of guiding that is maybe the most unnerving, which also applies to like athletes skiing for the camera, is just the pressure to go because so much has gone into a level of commitment that plays into your decision making. That is, decision making in dangerous settings is difficult. And yeah, you add that whole layer of business to it. And now a lot of other people have made commitments to get you there. And there's financial commitments, there's all those other things that just add an entirely new level of pressure and complication to your decision making.
All right. Well, they made the decision to do that line. Everything worked out. We are towards the end of the podcast, but before I end any podcast, I do something that I call inappropriate questions. And this is where I get someone that you know to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. And I was able to get a guy who's like a legend in the ski industry. He's done everything from write for Powder to be a CEO at K2. You were on the Friends of Tim Petrick program at K2 and got free product for, I would think, 15 years, whatever you wanted, because not only are you a badass, but anybody who's a badass and is friends with Tim is definitely going to be on K2, especially at that point. And Tim was going to do whatever he could to get free powder turns on K2's dime. He was the master of that. But right now, I have 3 inappropriate questions for you. Are you ready for question number 1 from Tim?
I think I'm ready, but here we go.
Hey, Doug, I'm curious. When I got to Jackson about 6 years ago, they told me that they called you Trigger. Why?
Because I've triggered a lot of avalanches. And when working on ski patrol, I triggered a lot of avalanches. Some that were near misses and consequential, some that were nothing, but certainly got knocked down several times. And ski patrollers love nicknames, and that one definitely stuck.
All right. Tim also told me a story that has nothing to do with Trigger, but before I forget, I'm going to throw it in here to inappropriate questions. At the Tsaina Lodge back in the day, there was a woman, Kirsten Kramer, who was an absolute badass. What was the things that she used to challenge all the dudes to do in the bar?
Climb the rafters, climb the timbers.
So what did that look like?
It's not easy, but you've got to climb up one wall of the bar and get a hold of the rafters and then kind of monkey yourself across the bar and get down the other side. And obviously it always involved alcohol, but I think even if you're sober, it's still a legit challenge. I think there was at least one person that fell from the top and didn't exactly walk out of there.
Okay.
But yeah, Kirsten, she's got that one wired. And when they rebuilt the bar, the Frasers, the new owners, were sure to recreate that. So it's the challenge is still there for those interested.
Oh, that's amazing. All right, we're going to go with Tim's question number 2.
Doug, I think you probably will remember when Hendy took the big crash down meteorite. And I'm just curious. I remember you telling me about him walking into the guide office and you looking into his eyes and wondering what the heck had happened to him. Could you recount that story?
I don't know what year this was. I should. But I was working on the ground I don't remember if I was injured or just taking my turn because everybody would rotate through working a ground day to get some rest and support the rest of the team. And Andy was out with a fairly famous client that skied up there for years and years. And they landed on meteorite and they all skied meteorite. And this client always skied with a professional photographer. And I think, I wasn't there for this part, but as I understand it, Andy mentioned that he would love to ski the far skier's right spine on meteorite, which ends with cliffs at the end of the spine. So you've got to get back left onto the ramp before the end of the spine. And then if you go off the right side of the spine, it's just miles of cliff. And Hendy on his tellies ripped the spine. And every other time he had skied the run, he'd been skiing it with guests. So in his brain, there was a certain amount of time that it took to get down the run. And he was suddenly at the bottom of the spine in a split second, skiing at his own pace. And it surprised him, I think, where he was. And so when he realized that he was already kind of at the bottom of the spine above the cliff, he was going pretty fast and he had to cut left back onto the ramp where all of his slough had been moving down the spine. But he didn't have a choice at that point not to go left. So he cut left, got taken out by the slough, and washed through the rocks. And he managed to ski back down to the group and knew he was banged up, but I don't think he thought he was really injured. So they decided, well, we'll just swing back to the lodge and take a break and get some lunch and some ibuprofen. So he walked out of the heli and came into the guide shack looking for some ibuprofen. And he wasn't really walking normally. So I asked him to look at his leg. And while I was doing that, the client came in and tapped me on the shoulder and pulled me aside to explain to me the severity of the fall and the cliffs he had fallen through, the rocks he'd fallen through. And then when I came back in, Hendy was then complaining of pain in other parts of his body, and it was obviously radiating. And just from the severity of the fall and the story that I'd heard, we decided that just from the mechanism of the injury alone, he should be on a backboard. So we threw him on a backboard and sent him in the heli to the Valdez Hospital, where they determined that he had a broken neck.
Holy shit.
So he definitely had a near miss that altered the course of his skiing career. And that one's so long ago that it's funny when I think of near misses and accidents. Hendy lives such an athletic, great life right now that I often forget how close that call was.
All right, heavy stuff. We're going to go into your final inappropriate question.
Just curious about your recollections, if you can remember anything from the Greg Harms celebration of life in Aspen.
All right, someone that we lost. I guess it was an epic celebration of life. And do you remember anything from that?
Yeah, so Greg died a couple years ago, a few years ago now. And I always have felt kind of on and off about going to memorials for people. Sometimes it just feels like too much. And I almost didn't go to that one, but I did go down to Aspen, and it definitely left an impression on me. It made me never want to miss another memorial service. It was amazing how many people came together for Greg, and I met so many people that I did not previously know, where we instantly were very bonded because of the relationship with Greg. And everybody had such a good time down there. It was the best way to send off the passing of a good friend. And it was a great reminder that those events, when, those memorials, I mean, of course they're sad, but they don't have to be grounded in sadness. They can truly be celebrations of life. And that was one of the best celebrations of life that I ever could imagine. It was a very, very special service. and several days long.
Well, that's pretty awesome, man. And that's Inappropriate Questions, and that's the podcast. And leading up to this one, I was scrambling to get all my research together. And then you called me like 30 minutes before we were supposed to start saying like, hey, are we doing this now? And I'm like, no, we're not doing it now. I still have 30 more minutes to put all my notes together. But it doesn't really matter because you nailed it with your answers. And really in your life, it's like your passion drove you to reach the top of dirtbagness. And then you parlayed that dirtbagness into like hundreds of heli ski days, more than most people will ever get in their entire life. Then you're able to parlay that into guiding and get a lucrative career there. And it sounds like these days, it's like you're part-time guiding, but you're also like doing some financial or real estate stuff, and you're living a big boy life now. So skiing can be like your side hustle, and you can start loving skiing again. It sounds like you did that last year. I thank you for telling your story, and I thank you for your time.
All right, great, Mike. Thank you for your time.
So that was time with Doug Workman, and talk about a mountain badass. Well, all the Jackson Hole folks that I've had on lately are complete legends and badasses in the mountains. It was an honor to get Doug into the mix. That's the podcast. I would say more in the outro, but I think Doug's interview speaks for itself, even though I can't remember it. I'm just trying to get through these things and hold my composure. I was able to do that in the intro, which is pretty special to me because I thought I was going to lose my shit. I'm not going to do that in the outro. So what I do want to do is thank you for listening and ask you to tell a friend about the show because that really does help it grow. Also, when you rate me on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen, that also helps me pop up the charts or the algorithm or whatever the hell I pop up in. So thank you for doing that. Finally, it's appreciated that you support my incredible sponsors who make the podcast happen. They are Elan Skis, Outdoor Research, Stanley, Best Day Brewing, and Ski Idaho. Have a great week, everyone.